He came for the beautiful sister. He couldn't stop talking to the other one. When the Duke of Merrivale arrived at Thornfield Park, he had one purpose: a sensible match, cleanly arranged. What he got was a woman who corrected him about monks, beat him at charades, and refused to want something she didn't think she could have. The carriage turned through the gates of Thornfield Park at 4:30 on a Tuesday, which was, in Sebastian Cavendish-Holt's considered opinion, the worst possible hour to arrive anywhere. Too late for the gardens to be walked without comment, too early for dinner to rescue him, and precisely the time at which a man was expected to make himself agreeable in a drawing-room for no discernible purpose. He looked out the window. The park was handsome enough. The house beyond it was a solid Georgian proposition. 3 stories, good proportion, nothing excessive. The Pembertons had not overspent. He noted this without particular feeling. It was the sort of detail his mother would want to know. "Your Grace." His secretary Fitch cleared his throat from the opposite seat. "The family will be assembled to receive you." "Yes." "Miss Cecily Pemberton is said to be—" "Fitch." "Your Grace." "I know what she is said to be. It was my mother who said it, and she has been wrong before." Sebastian straightened his cuffs. "I merely ask that you not recite her virtues at me through a carriage window. I shall discover them myself or not at all." Fitch subsided. Outside, a groom was already moving toward them. The carriage slowed. Through the glass, Sebastian observed 2 figures descending the front steps, a man of late middle age who would be Pemberton, and a woman beside him who was certainly Mrs. Pemberton, and behind them, a little to the left, half in shadow, a young woman in grey who appeared to be directing a footman about some matter of luggage already on the steps. She had her back to the carriage. Sebastian stepped out. The air was cool and smelled of cut grass and something faintly floral, wisteria perhaps, from the eastern wall. Pemberton came forward with the practiced ease of a man who had been a host many times and found it unremarkable. "Your Grace, welcome to Thornfield. A fine journey, I hope." "Entirely tolerable, sir. The roads through Shropshire are better than they deserve to be." Pemberton laughed, which Sebastian had not particularly intended. Mrs. Pemberton was pleasant, a little flustered, clearly anxious that everything should go well. He was polite to her. It cost nothing. The young woman in grey had turned around by now. She was sorting something, a small leather case of some kind, and she paused when she registered the scene. He noticed, without much interest, that she was not Cecily. He knew because Cecily Pemberton had been described to him comprehensively, golden-haired, uncommonly pretty with her mother's eyes. This young woman was dark-haired, with a composed, unremarkable face, and eyes that moved over the assembled party with an attention that he categorized briefly as intelligent and then set aside. "My elder daughter, Jane," said Mrs. Pemberton, as the girl came forward. He bowed. She curtsied. He had already looked away by the time she straightened. Cecily appeared a moment later from inside the house, slightly breathless, very pretty, and everything his mother had promised. He was cordial. He was appropriate. He said nothing he did not mean, and very little that he did. They were shown inside. Tea was promised. The grey girl, Jane, had disappeared. The drawing-room at Thornfield was a good room, not showy. Books on the shelves which Sebastian found more reassuring than ornament. He accepted tea from Mrs. Pemberton and made conversation with Pemberton about the condition of the roads, the season's prospects, and the relative merits of 2 hound breeds he had no strong opinion about. Cecily sat near her mother and was appealing to look at, and offered very little else. He did not hold this against her. She was 22 and had been told all her life that her face was sufficient. It would not have occurred to anyone to teach her otherwise. The other guests were a neighbouring family, a Sir William something and his wife earnest people, and a clergyman whose name Sebastian had already lost, and somewhere in the room, occasionally visible, Jane Pemberton, who had changed from grey into something pale blue, and was sitting at the far end of the room with a book in her lap that she was not, as far as he could tell, actually reading. He circulated. He was good at circulating. He said the right things to Sir William and the appropriate things to the clergyman and the necessary things to Pemberton, and none of it required any particular thought, which was both the advantage and the indignity of being a duke in a drawing-room. He ended up near the bookshelf. He was not looking for conversation. He was looking at the titles, which was the closest a man of his position could come to being left alone in company, and he had nearly achieved a comfortable 3 minutes of solitude when a voice beside him said, "That one is not as good as it looks." He turned. Jane Pemberton was standing at his elbow, closer than he had realized, because she had approached from the side and he had been looking left. She was indicating a volume on the shelf, brown binding, gold lettering. "You've read it?" he said. "Twice. The first time because the title promised more than it delivered, and the second time to confirm my initial assessment." "And?" "I was right the first time." He looked at her. She was looking at the shelf, not at him. Not with the performance of indifference, but with the genuine article. Her hands were at her sides. Her expression was composed. And then briefly, something moved across it, a thought she hadn't meant to be visible, and she tapped her thumb against her forefinger once, twice in a quick, light rhythm, and then stopped. "Which would you recommend instead?" he said. She reached past him and pulled out a volume 2 to the right. This one, less celebrated, considerably better. The author had the good sense to say what he meant without announcing that he was about to say it. He took the book. It was a collection of essays, not a novel, which surprised him. "You prefer essays to fiction?" he said. "I prefer precision to elaboration. It happens to appear more often in essays." She paused, though not always. Sebastian looked at her with slightly more attention than he had previously extended. She was not, in any conventional reckoning, a remarkable-looking woman. Her features were even, her colouring was dark, and she had made no particular effort to be noticed. No arrangement of curls, no strategic positioning near the candlelight. She looked like a woman who had come to a drawing room because it was required and had brought her own resources. He found this, against his expectations, interesting. "Are you often right," he said, "about books?" "About most things," she said quite pleasantly, "but particularly books." He almost smiled. He did not, on principle, almost smile at people he had known for 11 minutes. He returned the brown volume to the shelf. "I shall try your recommendation," he said. "You may keep it. We have 2 copies." She glanced past him toward the centre of the room, where Cecily was laughing at something Sir William's wife had said, a pretty, effortless sound. Something in Jane's expression did not change, which was itself a kind of information. "Dinner will be called shortly, I expect." She moved away. He watched her go, not because there was anything particular to watch, but because the conversation had been, unexpectedly, the first thing that had required him to actually think since the carriage turned through the gates. Dinner was straightforward. He sat between Mrs. Pemberton and Sir William's wife, which was not a position of significant entertainment, but he managed. Cecily sat across from him and smiled at him twice, both times when she caught him looking, which meant she was paying attention. He respected this without feeling anything warmer about it. Jane sat farther down the table near the clergyman, and he could not hear what she said to him, but whatever it was made the man laugh 3 times in 20 minutes, which was a better return than Sebastian had managed all evening with considerably more effort. He found himself watching her once. He stopped. After dinner, the gentlemen had port and then the party reassembled. And there was music. Cecily played competently, with the air of someone who understood that playing well was a point in her favour and was willing to earn it. Sebastian applauded at the correct moments. Jane did not play. She sat to one side and listened, and when she thought no one was looking, she did the thing with her fingers again, that small private rhythm of thumb against forefinger, as though she were counting something, or steadying something, or answering a question only she had heard. The evening ended at a reasonable hour. Sebastian made his farewells and was shown to his room. At the door he paused and turned to the footman who had accompanied him. "The elder Miss Pemberton," he said. "Jane, she has been out for several years, I take it." "Yes, Your Grace, Miss Jane is 26." He considered this. He was not sure what he had been expecting. "Good evening." He went inside. He was at the window, looking at nothing in particular, when he turned back and said to no one because Fitch had already been dismissed, "What was her name again?" The room did not answer. He stood there another moment, then went to bed. In the morning he came down early, which was not his habit, but which happened when the room was unfamiliar. The breakfast room was empty, except for one occupant, which was Jane Pemberton, who was sitting at the table with a plate of toast, a cup of tea, and the specific quality of stillness that indicated she had expected to be alone. "Your Grace," she said, without notable surprise. "Miss Pemberton." He poured himself coffee and sat, not immediately beside her, but not at the far end of the table either. The door stood open to the hall, as it always did at this hour. A maid had been through twice already, arranging things. "You rise early." "I always do." She returned to her toast. "The house is better in the morning." "In what sense?" She considered the question, which he noticed, that she actually considered it rather than reaching for the polite answer. "It belongs to itself," she said, "before everyone arrives to have opinions about it." He drank his coffee. Outside, a wood pigeon was making its case to the garden with considerable persistence. "You do not like company," he said. "I like particular company. I am less convinced by company in general. A dangerous distinction in a house party. All useful distinctions are dangerous." She looked at him then, briefly, with that same attentive quality from the evening before, measuring but not unkind. "You rose early yourself." The room was unfamiliar. "Does that usually prevent you from sleeping?" "Not usually." She accepted this without comment, which he found refreshing. A great many people, in his experience, filled silence with speech because they were frightened of what silence implied. Jane Pemberton did not appear to be frightened of it. She ate her toast with the calm of a woman whose interior life was sufficiently occupied to require no external supplementation. The wood pigeon continued its petition. Sunlight moved across the breakfast table in a slow diagonal. The maid returned with fresh hot water, set it down, and withdrew. Neither Sebastian nor Jane acknowledged her. "Tell me," Sebastian said, "whether you were right about anything this morning so far." She thought about it, the thumb touching the forefinger once. "I expected the eggs to be better than they are, so not entirely." He laughed. It was not a polite laugh, it surprised him slightly. She looked at him with something that was almost satisfaction, and then looked away again and drank her tea. By the time the rest of the household descended, Sebastian had been in conversation with Jane Pemberton for 40 minutes, had formed several opinions he had not held the night before, and had entirely neglected to think about Cecily. This registered as he rose to greet Pemberton as a minor administrative failure that he would correct shortly. He did not correct it shortly. The morning organized itself into a walk. The grounds were offered and accepted. Cecily attached herself to his left with charming intention, and Jane fell back with Sir William's wife, which was the correct and appropriate thing for her to do, and which Sebastian found with some irritation that he was intermittently aware of. Cecily pointed out the features of the park, the old oak, the ha-ha, the kitchen gardens. She was animated and lovely, and he listened and responded, and tried to locate the version of himself that had driven 4 hours from London to do exactly this. "My sister knows far more about the gardens than I do," Cecily said at one point with a light laugh that contained something smaller and sharper underneath. "She is terribly knowledgeable about everything, of course. It can be rather exhausting." Sebastian glanced back. Jane was saying something to Sir William's wife, who nodded with the enthusiasm of someone who had just had a useful thought explained to her. "She seems," he said neutrally, "to be well read." "Oh, endlessly," said Cecily. "She reads instead of, well, it suits her." She smiled at him. "Do you ride, Your Grace? Papa keeps good horses." He turned back. "I do," he said, and let the subject close. That afternoon, he found himself in the library on ostensible grounds of fetching the essays Jane had recommended. The library was a proper one. 2 stories, gallery, the smell of a room that was actually used. He had the title somewhere in his memory, and was running his eye along the shelves when he became aware that someone else was in the room. Jane was on the gallery, above and to the left. She had not heard him come in. She was pulling a book from the upper shelf with the focused air of someone who knew exactly what she wanted, and as she stepped back along the gallery, her free hand came up to rest briefly against the rail, and she did the thing again, thumb, forefinger, a private beat of 3, before she found what she was looking for and turned back to the stairs. She saw him at the bottom. A pause, not a startled one. "You found your way in," she said. "I was looking for the essays. 3rd shelf from the left, 4 in from the window." She came down the stairs without hurry. The library door stood open at his back. The afternoon footsteps of the household were audible in the passage beyond. "The library is open to guests. You needn't explain yourself." "I know. I was explaining myself anyway." She passed him and set her book on the table, a different volume, something botanical, and opened it with the ease of someone returning to a familiar place. "Did you read last night?" "Several pages. You were right. He says what he means." "Most people don't." She turned a page without looking at it. "It's a rarer quality than it should be." Sebastian found the essays on the 3rd shelf, 4 in from the window, exactly where she said. He pulled them out and stood there holding them, looking at the spine, aware that he was manufacturing a reason to stay in the room. "Miss Pemberton," he said. "Yes." "Do you always know where everything is?" She looked up at him then, and the expression on her face was one he couldn't quite categorize. Amused, but underneath that, something more guarded. "In this library, yes," she said. "I have had 26 years to learn it." He nodded. He should go. He did not go. "It occurs to me," he said, "that I have had better conversation in the last 18 hours than I have managed in the last 3 weeks in London." She regarded him for a moment. "That is either a compliment to me or an indictment of London." "Both," he said, "equally." She almost smiled. The almost was more interesting than a smile would have been. He took his essays and left. At dinner that night he was careful. He gave Cecily his attention, real attention, not the performed kind. She was pretty and she was pleasant, and she said nothing that bored him outright, which was better than he could say for several women he had conversed with this season. He reminded himself of this. His mother had not been wrong about her looks or her family or the fitness of the match. She had not been wrong about any of the relevant things. He did not look down the table. He nearly managed it. It was the laugh that broke him, Jane's from the far end, low and genuine at something the clergyman said. It was not a performing laugh. It was the sound of someone who found something funny and made no effort to perform the finding. Sebastian looked. She had her hand on the table, fingers loose, and she shook her head at whatever the clergyman had said next, and said something back that made him look delighted and slightly caught out. Cecily said something. Sebastian returned his attention to her, smoothly enough that he thought no one had noticed. Across the table, Sir William's wife was looking at him with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had noticed everything. The evening ended with cards. Sebastian partnered with Pemberton against Sir William and the clergyman, and for a time it was simple, numbers and strategy, which required enough attention to preclude other thoughts. He won, which was not particularly surprising. Pemberton was a competent player, Sir William was not. He was gathering the cards at the end of the final hand when Jane came to say good-night to her father, leaning in to kiss his cheek with the ease of long habit. Pemberton caught her hand and said something quietly to her, and she answered, and for a moment her expression was entirely unguarded, fond and a little tired and younger-looking than he had seen her. She straightened and said good-night to the room without looking at Sebastian in particular, and left. Pemberton watched her go with the particular look of a father who has turned something over in his mind for a long time and not yet finished with it. Sebastian dealt the next hand before remembering they had stopped playing. He was at the door of his room when he stopped Fitch. "The Pembertons," he said. "The elder daughter, Jane. She has not been previously attached, no prior understanding." Fitch looked professionally neutral. "Not to my knowledge, Your Grace. The family circumstances are... There was a question of portion some years ago, which may have... I wasn't asking about the portion." "No, Your Grace." Sebastian pushed open his door, stopped, turned back. "Her name," and he said, "Jane, plain." He said the word like a man testing the weight of something he thought might be wrong. "Who called her that first, do you think?" Fitch had no answer. Sebastian did not expect one. "Good evening, Fitch," he said, and closed the door. He slept badly, which he did not acknowledge to anyone, and rose at his usual hour with the flat efficiency of a man who had trained himself out of the luxury of mood. Fitch had his clothes. Coffee arrived. The window showed Thornfield Park in early light, the grass still wet, the oak tree at the bend in the drive catching the first proper sun. He went down. Jane was not in the breakfast room. He noticed this the way one notices that a clock has stopped, not dramatically, simply as an alteration in the expected. Cecily came down 20 minutes later, charming and gold-haired, and carrying the faint air of a woman who has taken care with her appearance and prefers that this not be too visibly noticed. She was pleasant company. They spoke about the weather, which promised to be fine, and about a proposed expedition to see a ruined priory 3 miles from Thornfield, which Sir William had raised the previous evening. "Jane will not come," Cecily said with the tone of someone describing a minor but characteristic inconvenience. "She never does, for excursions. She says ruins are melancholy, though I suspect she simply prefers to stay home and read." "And is she wrong?" Sebastian said. Cecily blinked at him. "About ruins being melancholy? About preferring a book to a ruined priory?" Cecily laughed prettily, easily. "I suppose not if one has that sort of temperament. I find it a little sad she misses a great deal." Sebastian drank his coffee and said nothing. Outside, the oak tree held its light. The party set out at 11. The priory was, as advertised, ruined. A Gothic shell of reasonable picturesque quality, with the advantage of a pleasant ride to reach it, and the disadvantage of Sir William's wife narrating its history at length. Sebastian listened to enough of it to seem engaged, and then found a section of intact wall to lean against, while Cecily walked the nave with Pemberton and the clergyman. He had brought the essays, he opened them. He read 4 pages and retained 2 sentences, because his mind was elsewhere, and he was honest enough with himself to admit it, if not to anyone else. He closed the book. The thing was, and he turned this over with the care he normally reserved for matters of actual consequence, the thing was that he had come to Thornfield with a clear purpose, which was to assess Cecily Pemberton and, finding her suitable, make the appropriate progress toward a formal understanding. His mother had arranged the ground. Pemberton had invited him. Everyone understood what the visit was. He had been here 36 hours. He had spent, by rough calculation, 4 of those hours in conversation with Cecily and 7 in conversation with her sister. This was not, he acknowledged, how the visit was intended to proceed. They returned to Thornfield for luncheon. Jane was in the garden when they arrived, not the formal garden near the house, but further out, at the edge of the kitchen beds, where she appeared to be in some kind of disagreement with a gardener about the placement of stakes. She won. The gardener retreated. She stood with her hands on her hips looking at the result, and then, apparently satisfied, walked toward the house and nearly collided with Sebastian, who had crossed the lawn without planning to. "Oh," she said. "Miss Pemberton, you are back early, or I have lost track of the time." She glanced at the son. The latter, apparently. The Priory was precisely as ruined as expected. High praise. She fell into step beside him, apparently without particular intention on either side. Mrs. Pemberton was visible on the terrace above, and the returning party was still crossing the lawn behind them. "Did Sir William's wife tell you about the monks?" "At considerable length. She always does. There weren't actually any monks. It was an Augustinian priory, canons, not monks, but she has decided on monks and the distinction no longer reaches her." "You have mentioned this to her?" "Once." A pause. "She was not improved by the information." He held the garden door open for her. She passed through with the absent ease of someone who has had doors held for her by footmen all her life, and has never once found it remarkable. Inside, the hall was cool and smelled of flowers, a bowl of them on the table, white and pale yellow. "You know the Priory well," he said. "I went when I was 17 and have declined every subsequent invitation. One visit is enough to form an accurate picture." She paused at the foot of the stairs and looked at him with that considered quality he was beginning to recognize. "Did you enjoy it?" "The ride was good." "That is not what I asked." "No," he said, "it was not." She waited. "I enjoyed 4 pages of essays and 2 passable sentences," he said. "The rest was largely exercise." Something in her expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the thing before a smile, which was in his experience more interesting. "I have the 2nd volume, if you've finished the 1st. "I haven't." "When you have." She went upstairs. He watched the empty staircase for a moment longer than necessary, then turned toward the dining room and reminded himself, with some firmness, of his purpose. Luncheon afternoon. A proposed game of croquet that Sebastian declined on grounds of a letter requiring his attention, which was true in the sense that he had several letters requiring attention, and false in the sense that none of them was why he was walking the long gallery rather than playing croquet. He was thinking. This was not, he told himself, a complicated situation. He had come to do a specific thing. The specific thing remained available to be done. Cecily Pemberton was lovely and appropriate and would make an entirely adequate duchess, which was all the role required, and he had known from the beginning that the role was what he was filling, and not anything more personal than that. This remained true. It remained true regardless of anything that had happened in a breakfast room or a library or a garden doorway, because those were conversations, and conversations were not. He did not form attachments from conversations. He was not that kind of man. He turned at the end of the gallery and walked back. He was, he conceded, perhaps very slightly that kind of man. The croquet concluded without him. The party reassembled. Tea was served. Sebastian sat near Cecily with the specific intention of actually speaking to her, really speaking, the way he had been speaking to her sister. And he tried, and Cecily tried back. And it was perfectly fine, and he thought, this is a woman I could marry without difficulty. He believed this was a sufficient recommendation. "Do you read much, Miss Cecily?" he said. She smiled. "A little, not as much as Jane. She is forever recommending things." The smile cooled slightly at the edges. "I prefer music and needlework. I am thought to have some talent for both." "So I understand." "Jane has no ear for music." This delivered without malice, or rather with the kind of malice that has convinced itself it is simple fact. She never did. Mamma despaired of her education in that respect, but she has other qualities, of course. a pause that contained a small, neat silence where a compliment might have gone. "She is very clever." "Yes," Sebastian said. Cecily looked at him. "I had noticed," he added in a tone that committed to nothing. That evening, before dinner, he went back to the library. He had not planned to. He was going to the smoking room, which took him past the library, and the door was open, and Jane was inside at the desk, with a lamp already lit against the fading afternoon, writing something. Mrs. Pemberton was visible through the far doorway in the adjoining sitting room, engaged with her embroidery, the connecting door ajar, as was usual between the rooms at this hour. Jane looked up. "You're allowed in without an excuse," she said. "I have no excuse today, I was passing." "Then pass, if you prefer." He came in instead. She was writing a letter. He saw this from the angle without intending to, and she set it aside without any particular secrecy, just the natural pause of someone setting one task down to take up another. "Did you find the croquet satisfying?" she asked. "I didn't play." "No, I saw you from the upper window, walking the gallery instead. 4 lengths, then you turned back." She said it without any weight, just observation. "Is that a habit?" "When I need to think." "What were you thinking about?" He looked at her. "Nothing particular," he said. She accepted this with the same equanimity with which she accepted most things, which was, he was finding, deeply unusual. Most people, when given an insufficient answer, pushed or performed acceptance. She simply returned the thing to him and let it sit. "Your letter," he said. "You needn't stop." "I had finished the important part." She folded it and set it to one side. "Sit, if you like. I was about to look for something." She rose and went to the shelves. He sat. The room was warm from the lamp, and outside the windows the light was going from gold to grey, and it was, he would not have used the word comfortable, because comfort suggested a passivity he did not associate with any room she was in, but it was settled. It had the quality of a room where 2 people were simply present without requiring each other to perform. She found her book, came back, sat, opened it. They read, or he did or did not. He was looking at the page of his essays and thinking about the word she had used. Habit. Is that a habit? Of the walking she had meant, but also, he looked up briefly over the edge of the book. She had a habit herself, the small rhythm of her fingers. He had seen it 4 times now. Once when she met him on the steps, once in the library, once at dinner, once in the garden. "You do something," he said before he had decided to say it. She looked up. "Your fingers," he said. "Thumb against the first 2 fingers. You do it when you're thinking." She looked at her hand. "Do I?" Not a denial, genuine surprise. "You've done it 4 times since I arrived." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "My governess used to say I counted things when I was nervous. I thought I had stopped." "Are you nervous often?" "Not often." A pause. "Occasionally." She did not say when, and he did not ask, and the not asking was itself a form of conversation. He looked back at his book. She looked back at hers. Dinner was called 20 minutes later. They walked to the dining room separately, she slightly ahead, him far enough behind that no one would note it as a thing. Sir William's wife noted it as a thing. The following day brought rain, which consolidated the party indoors, and produced the natural consequence of everyone spending slightly too long in each other's company. Pemberton retreated to his study. The clergyman wrote his sermon. Sir William played billiards with Fitch, which Sebastian had not anticipated, and which Fitch appeared to find bewildering but agreeable. Sebastian found himself in the morning room with Cecily, Mrs. Pemberton, Sir William's wife, and Jane, which was almost the full assembly, and was therefore both inevitable and complicated. They played a word game that Mrs. Pemberton proposed, and Sebastian played with enough competence to seem engaged and not enough to seem trying, which was the appropriate calibration for a man of his position in a room of people he was not trying to impress. Jane won. She won without commentary, which was worse because anyone else would have said something to acknowledge it, and she simply sat with the result as though winning was a natural consequence of playing correctly. "Jane always wins," said Cecily lightly, "to no one and everyone. It hardly seems fair to play with her." "Then we ought to handicap her," Sebastian said. Everyone looked at him. "It is the standard approach when one player has an advantage," he said. "Adjust the terms so the game remains interesting for all parties." Cecily laughed. Mrs. Pemberton laughed. Sir William's wife watched Sebastian with her particular brand of comprehensive attention. Jane looked at him for a moment, a look he could not read, which was itself unusual because he could generally read rooms and people with some accuracy, and then said, A handicap assumes the advantage is permanent. It might simply have been a good hand. Was it? He said. No, she said, but it would have been modest to say so. He almost laughed again. He did not. He looked away first toward the window where the rain was doing something geometrically interesting against the glass and thought, I am in some difficulty. In the afternoon, the rain slowed to a drizzle and Sebastian walked. Not the gallery, outside along the west path that ran beside the walled garden. The air was cold and smelled of wet stone, and it was the first moment in 3 days that he had been properly alone, without the soft, constant pressure of a room full of people who all understood, without quite saying so, why he was there. He walked for half an hour. He thought with some rigor. The situation was, he had come here to court Cecily Pemberton. He had made no formal declaration. He was in no way committed. He had, however, made certain implications by accepting the invitation at all, and those implications were of a nature that Pemberton, at minimum, would have understood. Withdrawing now for no reason would be, not unacceptable exactly, but untidy. It would require explanation. It would require honesty. The situation was also, he had been talking to the wrong sister. He stopped walking. This was not, he assembled the thought with care. This was not the same as anything having happened. 2 people could have good conversation without it becoming anything. Good conversation was pleasant, but it was not a bond. He had good conversation with Fitch occasionally. He had good conversation with his land steward and his solicitor, and once, memorably, with a woman on a coach who he had never seen again and could not now remember the name of. He would, he knew with a tiredness that was not comfortable, remember Jane Pemberton's name for considerably longer than that. He turned back toward the house. He was nearly at the garden gate, a broad wooden affair standing half open in the wet air, when voices reached him from the other side. 2 voices, close, carried through the gap with the particular clarity of a still, damp afternoon. Cecily's voice, "You are making it quite obvious, you know." A pause, then Jane, "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, you do." Cecily's voice carried that note he had heard before, light on the surface with the edge underneath. "He came here for me, Jane. Mamma said—" "I know what Mamma said. You do not seem to be conducting yourself with that in mind." The silence that followed was not a comfortable one. "I have done nothing improper," Jane said. Her voice was quiet, steady in the way that steadiness is a decision, not a condition. "No," Cecily agreed. "You have simply been extremely interesting and very available and waited for him to come to the library." A small pause. "Which he does. Rather a lot." "He comes to the library because he reads. Some people do." "Yes." A silence. "I don't mind particularly, you know. I am not— It is not as though I am in love with him. But it will be awkward, Jane. For everyone. If he starts to— He won't." The certainty in Jane's voice stopped Sebastian in place. He had not moved since the conversation began. He was aware that he was standing at a half-open gate in a garden in the rain, listening to a private conversation, and that this was both ignoble and, under present circumstances, unavoidable. "He is a duke," Cecily said, with a kind of practical flatness. "He came here to make a sensible match. Sensible matches do not involve plain—" "Cecily, I am only saying what everyone else is thinking. He will be very glad of the conversations. He will still make the sensible match." Another pause. "That is simply how it is." Footsteps, a door, silence. Sebastian stood in the wet garden for another moment. Then he walked back to the house and went upstairs, and stood at the window of his room looking at the oak tree in the park, and thought about the way Jane had said he won't, not as a hope, but as a verdict she had already handed down against herself. That evening he sought her out. Not in any compromising way. They were in a room full of people, and he crossed to where she stood near the window and said quietly, "The second volume, if the offer still holds." She looked at him. "Of course." "Tomorrow morning?" "The library is open to guests," she said for the second time. But she said it differently this time, with a flatness that had not been there before. He had heard what her sister said. She knew somehow that he had heard it, or suspected that someone had. He could see it in the way she held herself, not withdrawn exactly, prepared. He wanted, with an urgency he found inconvenient, to say something that would undo the verdict she'd handed down. He didn't. He thanked her for the recommendation and moved away. He was, he thought, beginning to understand the shape of the difficulty he was in. He did not sleep at all. This was not unprecedented. He had not slept well since arriving, but it was the first night he acknowledged the reason, rather than attributing it to an unfamiliar mattress. He lay in the dark and catalogued the facts with the systematic attention he gave to any matter requiring resolution. Fact: he had come to Thornfield to court Cecily Pemberton. Fact: he had spent the majority of his visit in conversation with Jane. Fact: the conversation had been, he did not dress it up, the most consistently engaging he could recall in recent memory, possibly in longer than that. Fact: he had heard through a garden gate Jane Pemberton's quiet, precise final assessment of the situation, and it had not sat comfortably. He won't, as though the outcome were already determined by forces neither of them had caused, but both of them were subject to. He rose at 5 and watched the park come light from his window. The oak tree materialized slowly from the grey, first a mass, then a shape, then a specific, ancient, individual thing. He found this obscurely useful. By the time he dressed and went down, he had arrived at a position. He would do what he had come to do. He would give Cecily Pemberton his proper, considered attention. He would be, not calculating, but clear-eyed. He would remember that duty had a shape, and he had known its shape since he was 12 years old. He was in the breakfast room for 6 minutes before Jane came in. "You're here early again," she said. "Are you as well?" "I thought—" She stopped, started again, differently. "I thought you might have the breakfast room to yourself this morning." He understood what this was. He chose to ignore it. "Sit down, Miss Pemberton," he said, not unkindly. "It is too early for politeness." She sat. She was in dark green this morning and looked in the early light as though she had not slept well either, which he did not remark upon. She poured her tea with the economy of someone who had done it 10,000 times. She did not speak. He said, "I was not mistaken when I said the conversation was the best I had managed in weeks." She looked at him over her cup. "I wanted you to know that," he said. I was not being—" He stopped. He was not accustomed to not knowing what he meant to say. "I was being accurate." She set her cup down. He could see her thinking, the deliberate quality of her, the care she took before she spoke. Then, "I know," she said. "I know you were." "Then—" "It doesn't change anything." She said it gently, which was somehow worse than if she had said it with anger. "You know it doesn't." He wanted to argue. He had 17 things he might have said, several of them reasonable, 1 or 2 of them true. He said none of them. She picked up her cup again. Outside, the wood pigeon made its customary case. The breakfast room filled with early light and silence, and neither of them said anything that could not be unsaid. The morning organized itself with the cruelty of ordinary things. Pemberton appeared and was genial. Mrs. Pemberton appeared and was anxious in a way she worked hard to conceal. Cecily appeared and was lovely, and directed herself towards Sebastian with a focused, pleasant attention that he had no legitimate complaint about. He gave her his morning. They walked. She asked about his estate in Northumberland. He described it simply, without embellishment. She listened with what seemed like genuine interest, though he suspected she was chiefly interested in what it implied about the life she might have there. This was not a criticism. It was rational. "Is it cold?" she said. "Northumberland, I mean. I have heard it is very cold." "In winter, yes, the north has weather with opinions." She laughed. He smiled. It was fine. Everything was fine. Behind them, some distance back, he could hear Jane talking to Sir William's wife. Something about the kitchen garden, the stakes, the perpetual disagreement about spacing, and her voice had that quality it always had, the clarity of a woman who says what she means. He kept his eyes on Cecily. He kept his attention on Cecily. He managed this for 37 minutes. Luncheon the afternoon. A proposed entertainment for the evening. Charades, which Sebastian had strong opinions about, none of which he expressed, because a man who refuses charades in company is a man who has made an enemy of the hostess. He played. Cecily was his partner for the first round. She was quick and animated and made an appealing picture when she laughed, and the room responded to her accordingly. Sir William's wife, watching him, had an expression he found interpretable. Jane did not play in the first round. She sat to one side and watched with the attention she brought to everything, not detached, but complete. When it was her turn, she played without performance, and was better at it than anyone else in the room, which she appeared not to notice or care about. The clergyman guessed her first word in 4 seconds flat, and looked as though he had been given a gift. Sebastian got her second word in 2. She looked at him with an expression that lasted less than a second, and then became something composed and neutral. Cecily noticed. She said nothing, but she reached for a biscuit and did not look at her sister, which was itself a kind of comment. It was after dinner, in the last hour of the evening, when the thing happened that he had been, without knowing it, moving towards since he arrived. The party had arranged itself into natural clusters. Pemberton and Sir William with Porton maps, Mrs. Pemberton and Sir William's wife in comfortable chairs, the clergyman at the pianoforte doing something him-adjacent, Cecily sitting near the fire with a piece of embroidery that she handled beautifully. Sebastian had moved to the bookshelves, not because he wanted a book, but because the shelves gave him a view of the room without requiring him to be the center of it. Jane came to stand beside him. She was looking for something on the shelf, genuinely looking, running her finger along the spines with that focused, quiet attention, and she said, without looking at him, "My father likes you." "I know," he said. "I like him." "He doesn't say it, but he is hoping—" She stopped. Her finger paused on the spine. "He wants Cecily to be well settled." "That is a father's prerogative." "Yes." She pulled a book half out and then pushed it back. "He wants her to be happy as well. He would not use the word, but that is what he means." Sebastian looked at the shelves. "Are those two things in conflict in your view? Being well settled and being happy?" "Not necessarily." She found what she was looking for, pulled it free, though they require different work. He looked at her. She was looking at the book. Her hand was still for once. "Miss Pemberton," he said. She looked up. "I spoke with your father about the estate this morning." He said it plainly. It was not quite an announcement, but it was close enough that she would understand it. The Northumberland property. Its management. Her expression did not change exactly. It clarified the way a photograph clarifies in development. The shapes were always there, but now they had edges. "Yes," she said, "I see." "I thought you should know." "Why?" Her voice was even. "You are not obligated to tell me anything." "No," he said, "I know." The fire crackled. Cecily laughed at something across the room, a light, easy sound. Jane looked down at her book, and he saw her hand move, thumb, forefinger, that quiet, private rhythm, and then stop, and she pressed her fingers flat against the cover, as though to prevent it. "She will be happy with you," Jane said. She is not a foolish girl. She is better than she sometimes seems." "I know she is." "Then," she exhaled once quietly, "good." She moved away toward the far end of the room, with the book held against her chest like something she needed to keep hold of. She sat near the window and opened it, and for the rest of the evening she was there, visible, present, reading, and entirely unreachable. Sebastian remained at the bookshelves for some time. He was aware with a precision that was not comfortable that something had just been decided between them, without his full agreement, and that he had allowed it to be decided, and that this said something about his character that he had not previously considered. He slept briefly, badly. In the morning, 3 things happened in sequence. First, Pemberton asked him over breakfast in the vague, circling way of a man who wishes to be direct, without being indelicate, whether Sebastian had found everything at Thornfield to his satisfaction thus far, and whether he anticipated staying through the remainder of the week. Sebastian said yes to both, with the flat commitment of a man who has made a decision and does not intend to relitigate it at 7 in the morning. Second, he went to the library for the 2nd volume of the essays, which Jane had said she would leave for him, and found it on the reading table with a slip of paper marking the first page. The paper had nothing written on it. He stood there looking at it for longer than the situation warranted, and then took the book and went to the window. Third, he was still at the window reading when Cecily came in. She came in looking for something and found him, and was for a moment, one genuine unguarded moment, startled to see him, and in the startle she looked at him with a directness she did not usually permit herself. He looked back. They were both silent for a second too long. "Your Grace," she said, recovering smoothly. "Miss Cecily." He closed the book. "Were you looking for something?" "Only my embroidery pattern. I thought I left it in here." She moved about the room in a graceful, efficient search. "I would not have interrupted you." "You did not interrupt." She found the pattern on a side table and folded it and stood for a moment at the edge of the room, and then said with the careful plainness of someone who has prepared a sentence, "I should like to tell you something if I may." "Of course." "I am glad you are here," she said, "and I would consider it honorable and kind is perhaps the word." She stopped, began differently. "If you are intending anything, I hope you mean it. That is all." He looked at her. She held his gaze without performance. "You have my word on that," he said. She nodded once, left the room. He sat with the book in his hands and the daylight on the floor, and the clear, specific knowledge that she had meant something by those words that he could not quite bring himself to examine directly. She was 22 and not foolish, and she had said, If you are intending anything, not I hope you intend, the conditional was doing a great deal of work. He found Jane in the afternoon. Not deliberately. He was walking the east path, the gravel one that ran beside the wall of the kitchen garden, the opposite direction from yesterday, and she was there, on a low bench at the path's bend, with a book in her lap and her eyes not on it, looking at the view over the ha-ha toward the lower field. Two of the younger housemaids were visible at the far end of the kitchen garden, tending to something near the cold frames, close enough that propriety was satisfied, distant enough that conversation carried no further than the bench. She heard him on the gravel and did not turn her head. He sat on the other end of the bench. There was room between them for a chaperone considerably less convenient than the housemaids. Neither spoke for a moment. I read 4 pages of the second volume, he said. And? He continues to say what he means. It is his greatest quality, she paused, and his most exhausting one. Do you find directness exhausting? She turned her head to look at him finally. In others, occasionally, in prose, never. She looked back at the field. There is something convenient about a book that cannot answer back, as opposed to a person. As opposed to a person. He stretched his legs out in front of him and looked at the same field she was looking at. The lower pasture, some sheep, an unremarkable Shropshire horizon. The afternoon light was warm and angled, and hit the grass at a quality he associated with days that were going to be remembered. Miss Pemberton, he said. You do that, she said before he could continue. You say my name like a sentence. He stopped, considered this. Do I? When you're going to say something you have thought about. She did not look at him. You lead with it, Miss Pemberton, as though establishing something. He was quiet. Then, I was going to ask whether you were happy. Whether I was... She paused. That is not a straightforward question. I know. She looked down at the book in her lap. He watched her hand settle on the cover. Not the nervous rhythm, but something different. A stillness. I am content, she said after a moment, most days, which is not the same thing, but it is a great deal more than some people have, and I am not inclined to complain about it. That is not an answer. No, she agreed, it isn't. She turned the book over in her hands, one slow movement, looking at its cover without reading it. Are you? Happy? Yes. He thought about this with the same rigor he had applied to everything since arriving. I am generally functional, he said. I find things interesting. I have good land and useful work, and I am not... He stopped. No, I don't think I am. She looked at him. Her expression was careful, and beneath that sorry, a clean, clear kind of sorry that was worse than pity would have been. Sebastian, she said. He went entirely still. She stopped. She had said his name without intending to. He could see the moment she realized it, the way her expression shifted, a fraction into something more guarded. Your Grace, she corrected quietly. You had it right the first time, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. This is not, she said slowly, a good direction. No, he said, I know. Neither of them moved. The afternoon held them in its particular, unrepeatable light. Then, from the direction of the house, a sound, Mrs. Pemberton's voice calling for something or someone. It broke the moment without resolving it. Jane rose. She smoothed her skirt with one efficient motion. She looked at him once more, direct, clear, with the expression of a woman performing her last civil act before retreating somewhere he could not follow. I will leave the third volume on the library table, she said. She walked back toward the house. He sat on the bench and watched the lower field, where nothing in particular was happening, and recognized, with the flat clarity of a man who has finally admitted something to himself, that he had been talking to the wrong Miss Pemberton for 4 days, and that this was the least of his problems. The wood pigeon somewhere in the kitchen garden wall began its case again. He did not find it hopeful. That evening, before dinner, Sebastian stood in his room and made the decision. The decision was not complicated. It was, in fact, the only decision available to a man who had given his word and who believed, as Sebastian Cavendish-Holt believed, with the stubbornness of someone who has built their character around it, that his word was not a casual instrument. He would speak to Pemberton. This week, he would make the proper, formal, appropriate progress with Cecily, who was kind and pretty, and who had asked him, with considerable dignity, to mean it if he intended anything. He intended it. He would intend it. He straightened his cuffs, looked at himself in the glass with the expression of a man who has issued an instruction to himself and expects compliance. He went downstairs. At the foot of the stairs, Jane was crossing the hall toward the dining room, a shawl over her arm, her dark hair neat, her face composed and private. She did not see him. He watched her for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which he said nothing, did nothing, decided nothing new. Then he followed her in, and sat in his place at table and was precisely what he had decided to be. He was very nearly convincing. From the far end of the table, Sir William's wife watched him with the unhurried attention of a woman who has been watching people at dinner for 40 years and has never once been wrong. He spoke to Pemberton the following morning. Not about Cecily, not yet, not formally, but the conversation had the shape of a formal one, the careful architecture of two men who understand each other's intentions and are building toward an explicit statement without quite arriving at it. Pemberton was warm. He was relieved, Sebastian thought, in the way of a man who has been carrying a quiet anxiety and has just been told to set it down. "She is a good girl," Pemberton said about his younger daughter. "A very good girl." "I have every reason to think so," Sebastian said. They shook hands over nothing in particular, and Sebastian walked out of the study with the specific weight of a man who has moved a thing one step closer to irreversible. He went to the library. The 3rd volume was on the table as promised. He picked it up. He stood at the window and read the 1st page and the 2nd and the 3rd, and then he closed it and set it down and stood looking at the park. The oak tree was doing something particular with the light this morning. He had noticed this about it every day. He had started to think of it as a kind of register. The tree in flat grey morning, in raking afternoon gold, in the cool silver of an evening that was about to turn cold. It was, he thought, the same tree under all those lights, and none of the lights changed what it was. This line of thought was, he acknowledged, not useful. He left the library. The day was fine. The party distributed itself across Thornfield's various resources: Pemberton's billiards room, the morning room, the gardens, the long walk to the south that passed the pond and the old gamekeeper's cottage. Sebastian went on the walk. Cecily went on the walk. Mrs. Pemberton and Sir William's wife went on the walk. The clergyman went on the walk. Jane did not go on the walk. Jane was in the garden with her disagreement about the kitchen beds, which apparently had not been fully resolved on the previous occasion. Sebastian walked. He was pleasant. He made conversation. He noticed that the pond had good reeds and said so, and Cecily laughed and said she supposed it did, and he thought, she is 22 and has never had to find her own resources, and it is not her fault, and I am being unfair. He stopped being unfair. He tried harder. It worked moderately. There were 20 minutes near the gamekeeper's cottage, where Cecily told him, haltingly at first and then with more confidence, about a horse she had loved as a child, a grey mare called Pearl, sold when money was tighter, and she had not quite. She smoothed her expression before it could arrive anywhere. It was the most unguarded he had seen her. "I'm sorry," he said, "about Pearl. It was years ago." She smiled, meant it mostly. "One grows out of these things." "Does one?" She looked at him. "I suppose it depends," she said, "on what the thing is." He looked at the cottage. "Yes," he said, "I suppose it does." They walked back. It was, he thought, the best hour they had spent together. He held on to this. He saw Jane at luncheon, and she was perfectly composed and perfectly pleasant, and handed him the salt when he reached for it, before he had quite decided he needed it, which was either attention or habit, and he could not determine which, and the uncertainty was its own kind of difficulty. After luncheon she disappeared. He did not look for her. He was in the East Passage at 3:30, on his way from nowhere in particular to somewhere equally unspecified, when he heard her voice from behind a half-open door, the small sitting room rarely used, and then another voice with it. Cecily's. He should have walked on. He had walked on 3 days ago through a garden gate, and the thing he had heard had not improved his situation. He was, nevertheless, a man capable of learning. He stopped. Not to eavesdrop. He stopped because Cecily's voice had a quality he had not heard in it before, not the light surface sharpness, but something lower, something that was actually upset, and the human instinct to ascertain whether something was wrong was, apparently, stronger than his better judgment. "I am not accusing you of anything," Cecily said. "Good," said Jane, "because there is nothing to accuse me of." "I know that." A pause. "I know, I see him, Jane. I see how he looks when he's talking to you, and I see how he looks when he's talking to me, and they are not—" She stopped, started again. "They are not the same." Silence. "Cecily." Jane's voice was quiet, the particular quiet of someone choosing each word before using it. "He came here for you. He has been perfectly attentive. He spoke to Papa this morning." I know. Then, I know what it means when a man speaks to Papa. Cecily's voice had settled into something more resigned. I am not a child. I know what is happening. Another pause. I simply did not expect to feel. I didn't expect to mind. Sebastian stood in the East Passage and felt something very specific and not comfortable. You mind? Jane said, and her voice was careful now. Carefully gentle, which was the voice of someone who was also minding something and did not intend to show it. Not about him, Cecily said. I don't think I am in love with him. I don't think I was going to be. A sound, not quite a laugh. But I mind that he looks at you the way he looks at you. Not because I want it. Because... She stopped. Because I am used to being looked at, Jane, and I don't know what it means when I'm not. The silence that followed this was a different kind. The kind where something true has been said, and both people are adjusting to it being in the room. You will be looked at, Jane said finally, by someone who means it entirely. Yes, well, Cecily's voice had recovered some of its surface. That is very comforting. I know it isn't. A pause. I'm sorry, Sec. He walked away. He walked to the end of the passage and turned right and kept walking until he was in a part of the house that required him to retrace his steps to go anywhere purposeful. He stood there for a moment. Cecily did not love him. He had known this in the abstract. He had not known she knew it. Jane had said, I'm sorry, Ceci, with the voice of someone apologizing for something they had not done and could not have prevented. He thought about what he had said to Pemberton that morning, and the handshake and the quiet weight of it. He thought about the word irreversible. He did not see Jane alone until the following afternoon. He had spent the intervening hours being as present and correct with Cecily as he knew how to be, which was, he noted, not nothing. He was capable of presence, capable of attention, and Cecily was, as he had told himself repeatedly, better than she sometimes seemed. They played cards. He listened to her play the pianoforte. He walked with her in the garden and asked about Pearl's replacement. A bay gelding she apparently had complicated feelings about, and she was funny about it, unexpectedly, with a dry edge he had not anticipated. He went to bed both nights clear-eyed about what he was doing and why. He also went to bed fully aware that the library had been empty both afternoons, because he happened to pass it, which he had not planned, and the table where the third volume sat had not been disturbed. The following afternoon he was alone on the bench at the East Path's Bend, the bench where he had sat with Jane 4 days ago, when she came around the corner with a book under her arm and stopped. Oh, she said, for the second time since he had arrived, with the same specific quality, genuine surprise without distress. The bench has no reservation system, he said. She looked at him, and then at the bench, and then he saw her make the decision. She sat down. Other end. Same arrangement as before. At the far end of the kitchen garden, the 2 housemaids were back at the cold frames, audible but not attentive. The silence was different from 4 days ago, thicker, not uncomfortable but occupied. You've been reading, he said. Attempting to. She set the book on her lap. And you have been. It has been a productive few days. In what sense? She looked at the field. You have been attentive to Cecily. Yes. I think she has found it easier. A pause. Between you. I think so too. Good. She said it with the flat completeness of someone closing a door. That is good. He looked at the same field she was looking at. The same sheep, different angles. The light was lower today, later in the afternoon, and it hit the ha-ha's stone edge in a way that made it look older than it was. Cecily told me something yesterday, he said, inadvertently, through a door I should not have been standing near. Jane went still. She said she was not in love with me, he said. She was fairly clear about it. A pause. Then you misheard her. Jane. He said her name. Her name, not Miss Pemberton, and he felt the shift of it even as he said it, the way it changed the register of the conversation without negotiation. I did not mishear her. She looked at him. This was the first time in this particular conversation that she had looked directly at him. Her expression was the most guarded he had seen on her face, and he had seen her guard it in several configurations. It changes nothing, she said. I know you think that. It is not a matter of thinking, it is. You have spoken to my father, you have made... She pressed her fingers against the book cover, flat, deliberate. You have made an implication. A man of your position does not withdraw from an implication without consequences. I am aware of that. Then why are we discussing this? He thought about how to say it. He did not want to say it wrong, which was not a concern he generally had in conversation, and the unfamiliarity of it was informative. Because, he said, I have been thinking about what I am doing, and I would like your honest assessment of it, since you are the only person here whose honesty I trust. She stared at him, then quietly, That is not a fair thing to say to me. No, he said, I know. The afternoon held. Somewhere in the kitchen garden the pigeons were making their perpetual argument. Jane looked down at the book in her hands, and he watched her consider something, and then she said, without looking up, You came here to do a specific thing. Yes. The thing you came to do is still available to be done. Yes. Cecily is... She stopped. Whatever she said to you through the door, she is not. She would not be unhappy with you. She would settle into it. She is practical, under everything. I know. Then? She spread her hands briefly on the book, an almost gesture. What is the question? He turned to face her, fully so she would have to look at him. She did finally, because she had no choice. The question, he said, is whether I am doing the right thing or the convenient thing, and I find at present that I cannot tell them apart. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her thinking, could almost see the precise shape of the thought, and then she said, If you cannot tell them apart, they may be the same thing, or I may be too close to it to see clearly. You are asking me to help you see clearly. Her voice was flat. About whether to marry my sister. Yes. That, she said, is genuinely one of the more extraordinary things anyone has said to me. I imagine so. And you think I am the appropriate person to... She stopped. She pressed her thumb to her forefinger once, twice, and then looked at him with the directness she usually reserved for the last sentence of a conversation. Why do you trust my honesty? Because, he said, you were honest when it cost you something. The morning after I arrived, in the breakfast room, you told me it didn't change anything, and you meant it, and you said it when it would have been very easy to say something else. She was quiet. And, he said, because I have now had a considerable number of conversations with you, and you have not once said a thing you did not mean. She looked at the field. He looked at her. Sebastian, she said, and this time she said it without correcting herself after. Jane, if you do not marry Cecily, she stopped. If you withdraw, she will recover. I am not saying it would be managed. She is resilient. A breath. But my father. I know. He has counted on this. I know. And you, she turned back to him. What do you want? Not what is correct, not what is expected. What do you actually want? He looked at her. He let the silence be what it was. Then he said quietly, I want to have breakfast with someone I have to think to keep up with. I want to argue about books with someone who argues correctly. I want to say a woman's name because I mean it, not because it is the name of the woman I am supposed to mean. He paused. I want the bench at the east path rather than the walk to the pond. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, That is either the clearest thing anyone has said to me or the most unfair. Both, he said, equally. She recognized the echo of her own words. He saw it on her face, the shock of it, and then something beneath the shock, something that was not managed and not composed, and had not been filtered through any of the careful machinery she used to keep herself at the right distance from things. She looked at the field. He looked at her. He said, Jane. She turned. He kissed her. It was not a long kiss. It was not a dramatic one. It was brief and quiet and completely deliberate, and it lasted the length of an exhaled breath, and when it ended, neither of them moved for a moment. Then she pulled back, not with alarm, with the specific, careful movement of someone who has permitted themselves something they understand is significant and needs to place it correctly. That, she said very quietly, was not wise. No, he agreed. If your father does not receive me well this evening, it will be considerably less wise still. She looked at him. The stakes of the sentence, the acknowledgement that what had just happened required resolution, and quickly, and in only one direction, landed on her face with a precision that was almost visible. You spoke to my father, she said. Yes, and I intend to speak to him again tonight, with rather more honesty than this morning. She stood. She had her book under her arm, and her expression was the most unguarded he had ever seen it. Not open, exactly, but the guard was down, and what was behind it was not what he had expected. It was not warmth, primarily. Though warmth was there, it was sorrow, a clean, quiet, specific sorrow. Quiet. Nothing has changed, she said, not yet. No, he agreed, not yet. She walked back toward the house. He watched her go. He sat on the bench alone for some time afterward, looking at the ha-ha in the field and the lower pasture, where the sheep continued their uncomplicated afternoon. The oak tree was visible from here, at the bend in the drive. It was catching the late light. He sat there for a long time. Then he went inside and he found Pemberton's study and he knocked. Pemberton looked up from his desk. "Your Grace," he said with the warmth of a man who believes a conversation is going one way. Sebastian closed the door behind him. He stood in front of the desk. He said, "Sir, I owe you an honest conversation." Pemberton's expression moved through several positions in quick succession. He set down his pen. "Sit down," he said finally. Sebastian sat. He said what he had to say with the plainness it deserved. No dramatics, no excessive apology, no performance of remorse that would make Pemberton feel better while remaining fundamentally decorative. He had come to Thornfield in good faith. That faith remained. His intentions toward the family remained honorable. But he could not. Cecily deserved a man whose attention was not divided. And his attention was divided, and it had been divided since the first morning in the breakfast room, and a man of his word did not proceed under those circumstances, because a man of his word understood that the word was meant to protect the other party, not just himself. He did not say Jane's name. He did not need to. Pemberton was not an unobservant man. Pemberton sat for a long time after Sebastian finished. He looked at his desk. He looked at his pen. He looked at the window where the late afternoon was turning the sky above Thornfield Park to something between gold and grey. "She is the elder," Pemberton said finally. "Yes. You understand what the family's circumstances—" "I understand." "You understand," Pemberton said more carefully, "that this is not the match that was arranged, that there will be, in London, in society, those who will say you were made a fool of, or made a fool of yourself, and that a portion of that opinion will attach itself to my daughter's name. I will not have her married into a scandal she did not make." "I understand completely," Sebastian said. "I intend to present the matter to my family and to the world simply. I came to Thornfield. I found the woman I wished to marry, and I married her. There is nothing in that account that is dishonorable, and I have sufficient standing to ensure the account is the one that circulates." He paused. "It will require some management. I am prepared to manage it." Pemberton looked at him with the measuring attention of a man who has been underestimated before and is deciding whether this is that kind of occasion. "You know what you are saying," he said. "Yes," Sebastian said, "I do." Another long pause. Then Pemberton said slowly, the way of a man making a calculation he has done before, but is doing again to be certain, "She would not. Jane would not accept pity. She would not accept a man who had come for her sister and settled. She would know the difference." "I know she would." Sebastian met his eyes. "I am not offering to settle." Outside, the light was doing its last particular thing with the park. Pemberton picked up his pen, set it down again. "Give me a day," he said. "Of course." Sebastian stood. He bowed correctly. He left the study and closed the door behind him. In the hall he stood for a moment. Upstairs somewhere he could hear movement. The household preparing for dinner. A door. Footsteps. Jane's voice briefly, saying something to a maid. He stood there and listened to the house. He spoke to Cecily the following morning. He had thought the night before about how to do this, what it required in terms of honesty and dignity and decency, and he had arrived at a position that was simple, if not easy. He would not apologize to the point of diminishment. He would not construct elaborate explanation. He would say what was true without dressing it to be more comfortable than the situation deserved. He found her in the morning room at 9, alone, which was perhaps not entirely coincidental. She was at the window with her embroidery, and she looked up when he came in, and her expression told him immediately that she had already prepared herself. "I thought it might be this morning," she said. He sat in the chair opposite. "I am sorry, Miss Cecily." "Don't be." She set the embroidery down. She looked at him with the directness he had seen in the library, that one unguarded moment. "I told Jane that I thought it might be this morning." "What did she say?" "She said I was wrong." Cecily's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. She is right about most things, but not apparently everything. He looked at her. She bore the inspection with composure that was real, not performed. He found himself thinking genuinely that she was going to be entirely fine. "You deserve someone who comes specifically for you," he said. "Yes." She picked her embroidery back up. "I do." She turned it in her hands without looking at it. "Will you make her happy?" The directness of it was sufficient to require a moment. "I intend to try," he said. "She will be difficult about it," Cecily said with the specific authority of a sibling. "She will tell you it is unnecessary and that she was perfectly content, and she will mean it. And she will also be wrong. She looked up at him. She has talked herself into contentment for so long that she has confused it for the real thing. He thought of the bench, the field. I am content most days, which is not the same thing. I know, he said. Cecily nodded once. Then you have some work to do. She returned to her embroidery with the composure of someone who has made a decision and intends to hold it. I think I will visit my cousin in Bath. I have been meaning to for some time. The house party will dissolve naturally, and everyone will find something to do. Your father? Papa will manage. He is not as fragile as Mama would like him to appear. A pause. He came to find me last night, actually, before I went to sleep. She smoothed a thread. He did not say very much. He patted my hand. Another pause. He did that when Pearl was sold. I find it remains useful. Sebastian stood. He bowed correctly as he had bowed to her the first night. You are kinder than the situation required, he said. Yes, she said pleasantly. I am aware. She looked up at him once more with the equanimity of a woman who has taken her own measure and is not displeased with the result. Be specific with her. She responds to precision. He left the room. In the hall the morning was proceeding around him. Breakfast smells, footsteps overhead, the particular domestic rhythm of a country house organizing itself for the day. He stood for a moment, and then he went upstairs, and he wrote 2 letters. The first was to his mother. It was brief, accurate, and final in the way he had learned, made his mother's responses shorter. He had come to Thornfield. He had met the woman he intended to marry. The match was not the one she had arranged. The woman in question was Jane Pemberton, 26, the elder daughter of the family, a woman of no great portion but considerable intelligence and character, and he would be obliged if his mother would receive this information in the spirit in which it was offered, which was as fact not invitation to debate. The Cavendish-Holt name was his to manage. He would manage it. The second letter was to his solicitor, and was rather longer. He put on his coat and went outside. He found Jane in the kitchen garden. Not near the stakes this time. She was at the far end, near the espaliered pears on the south wall, crouched down to look at something at the base of a plant, with the focused, complete attention she gave to everything. She heard him on the path and stood. She looked at him. He looked at her. In her expression he could see that she already knew. Cecily would not have waited. Or perhaps Pemberton. Or perhaps she had simply woken this morning with the knowledge that something had moved, and the knowing had produced in her face an expression he had not seen before. Not the carefully composed neutrality, not the almost smile, something more fundamental than either of those, something that was afraid. Cecily has decided on Bath, he said. A pause. Has she? She was very composed. She always is, Jane said with a softness that was entirely for her sister. Then Sebastian. The name out, unguarded, unretracted. You spoke to my father last night. Yes. He came to me this morning. She pressed her thumb to her forefinger once. He asked me a question. What question? She looked at him steadily. He asked me whether I was happy. Sebastian looked at her. I said no, she said. He seemed unsurprised. He stepped forward. She did not step back, which he noted. I told him, Sebastian said, that I was not offering to settle. I know. He told me that too. Her voice was even. Her hands were still at her sides. The difficulty is that you did come here for someone else, and everyone in this house knows it, and everyone who saw the week will know it, and the calculus of this is not— She stopped. I am not. I've been very careful all my life not to want things that are not available to me. I know. And then you arrived and talked to me about books. Yes. And sat in the library. Yes. And said my name like it was a sentence. Her voice had dropped. Not to a whisper, Jane Pemberton did not whisper, but to the register of something private. And yesterday on the bench you— Jane. She stopped. I am not here to argue, he said. I am here to tell you that I spoke to your father, and your father has given me leave to speak to you, and I intend to do so directly, because you have told me you prefer precision to elaboration, and I am attempting to accommodate this. Her mouth moved, not quite a smile, close enough. I want to marry you, he said. I want the breakfast room and the library and the bench at the East Path and the argument about whatever you have been arguing about with that gardener. I want to hand you the second volume of things and have you tell me whether I was right. I want— He stopped. You told me 4 days ago that you were content. I don't want you to be content. I want you to be happy, which is not the same thing, and I believe you know the difference, and I believe that in this specific instance, with this specific offer, You know which one is being proposed." She looked at him for a very long time. "You are asking me to trust," she said, "that it is that I am not—" "You are not a consolation," he said. "You are not the second option. You are the reason I have been walking the gallery at 3 in the afternoon and failing to read and asking Fitch questions I already know the answers to." He looked at her. "You are the reason I asked for your name twice." She stilled. "What?" "The first night," he said. "I asked Fitch who you were at the foot of the stairs. Then I was halfway up and I turned around and asked again." He paused. "Not because I hadn't heard, because I wanted to." The kitchen garden was very quiet. The south wall held the afternoon warmth, and the espaliered pears were doing their flat, ancient, untroubled thing against the stone, and Jane Pemberton stood in the middle of it all with an expression he had not yet seen on her, open and a little undone, and finally, like someone who has stopped arguing with a conclusion. "Yes," she said. He said, "Yes?" "Yes," she said again, more clearly. "That was my answer to the question you were asking. A breath, which I believe requires a yes." He crossed the remaining distance between them. He took her hand carefully with the specific intentionality of a man who means every gesture, and held it, and she looked down at their hands, and then up at him, and the expression on her face was one he intended to catalogue and keep. "The gardener was wrong about the spacing," she said. He laughed. The same real, unmanufactured laugh as the morning she told him about the eggs. "I'll take your word for it," he said. "You will have to learn to do that generally," she said. "I am usually right, so you have mentioned." He was still holding her hand. "I'll manage." She looked at him with the expression that was not quite a smile, and was becoming, he thought, his favourite expression in existence. "About most things," she said, "I expect you will." The remainder of the week at Thornfield dissolved with the natural efficiency of a house party whose purpose has concluded. Cecily departed for Bath on Thursday with a trunk, a maid, and the light step of a woman who has made peace with a situation and intends to enjoy the alternative. She kissed Jane's cheek at the door and said something quietly in her ear that made Jane's expression shift to something that was fond and sorry and glad in equal measure. Sir William's wife, departing on Friday, said goodbye to Sebastian with the look of a woman who had known from Tuesday of the first week and wished everyone would simply apply to her in future to save time. The clergyman shook Sebastian's hand warmly and said he hoped to see them in the parish again soon, which was such a particular deployment of the word "them" that Sebastian looked at Pemberton, who had the expression of a man who had said more to the clergyman the previous evening than he had intended to. Pemberton himself, on the last morning, found Sebastian in the breakfast room and sat down and poured his own coffee, and was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man approaching a subject obliquely. "You will treat her well," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Sebastian said, "I intend to." "She will argue," Pemberton said. "I have noticed." "She is generally right." Pemberton picked up his cup. "It is easiest to simply acknowledge this from the outset." "I am beginning to understand that." Pemberton nodded. He drank his coffee. He looked out the window where the oak tree was doing its particular morning thing. "Her mother cried," he said. "I want you to know that. She cried a great deal, and she is very happy." Sebastian looked at his plate. "Good," he said, with more feeling than the word usually carries. "Jane did not cry," Pemberton said. "No. She read 3 books in 2 days and reorganized the linen cupboard." Pemberton set his cup down. "This is, with Jane, equivalent." Sebastian smiled at his coffee. "I'll remember that." They were married in September, in the parish church 3 miles from Thornfield, on a day that was clear and cool and smelled of early autumn. It was a modest ceremony. Pemberton and Mrs. Pemberton, Cecily back from Bath with a new dress and the particular satisfaction of someone who has been asked her opinion about the flowers and correctly given it. Fitch in the second row looking professionally neutral. The clergyman with the expression of a man who had seen this coming from the charades round and was vindicated. Sebastian stood at the front of the church and watched Jane come up the aisle with her hand on her father's arm, in pale ivory and dark ribbon, and she was looking straight ahead, and when she found him she kept looking, without the composed neutrality, without the managed distance, with the specific quality of a woman who has decided to be fully present to the thing that is happening. He had thought in the days before the wedding about the word plain. He had turned it over the way he turned other problems, with rigour, with honesty. He had looked at her across breakfast tables and in libraries and on the bench at the East Path and in the kitchen garden with her hand in his, and he had considered the word from every available angle. He had concluded that it was the least accurate word he had ever encountered. She reached him, Pemberton put her hand in his, the clergyman began. Beside him she did the thing. Thumb, forefinger, the small private rhythm. He looked down. He put his other hand over hers, gently, and she went still. She looked at him. He looked back. The clergyman continued. Outside, the Shropshire autumn was doing something excellent with the light. Thornfield Park, a Wednesday in December, 4 years into the marriage. The breakfast room had been reorganized. This was, Sebastian had learned, a thing that happened when Jane arrived at a house, not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, as though the house itself was being brought into closer agreement with what it already wanted to be. The shelves in the library had been reordered on a system he had at first disputed, and then conceded was better than the existing one. The morning routine had acquired a shape. The breakfast room had, at some point, gained a second reading lamp and a small table near the window that held whatever book was currently being annotated, because Jane had decided that reading at table was not a social failure if one was reading alone, and Sebastian had decided, about a fortnight into the marriage, that this was one of the better domestic positions he had encountered. It was cold outside. The park was grey and still, the oak tree bare now, its shape against the December sky more architectural than arboreal. From inside, in the warmth, it looked like an illustration of itself. Eleanor was 3. She was currently under the breakfast table, which was not technically where she was supposed to be, but she had been under there for 11 minutes without incident, and Sebastian had assessed the situation and decided this was not a battle that needed fighting before 9 in the morning. Frances was 1. She was in Sebastian's lap, which had also not been the plan for breakfast, but Frances had opinions about mornings, and one of those opinions was that she preferred to be in his lap during them, and she expressed this opinion with a physical directness that he found difficult to argue with. Jane was reading. She had her cup in one hand and a page in the other, and the small table by the window was already occupied by 2 volumes she had not yet reached. She had been reading since 7:30. It was now, he checked, 8:43. Francis grabbed his toast. He let her have it. She examined it with the serious forensic attention of a very young person encountering toast. "Eleanor," Jane said without looking up from her page, "you may come out when you've decided to be above the table and not under it." "From under the table, I'm looking for something." "What are you looking for?" A pause. "I'll know it when I find it." Jane turned a page. Sebastian watched her. She was in the pale morning light with her dark hair pinned up and her reading expression on, the one that was not quite a frown, where she was moving faster than the words and was slightly impatient with their pace. And Francis, in his arms, was examining the toast with enormous seriousness, and under the table Eleanor had apparently found what she was looking for because she made a small, satisfied sound. Sebastian looked at his wife. He looked at his daughters. He looked at the oak tree through the window, bare and specific and entirely itself. "Jane," he said. Still reading. "I have no interest in plain women." She looked up from the page. She looked at him with the expression that had been his favourite since a kitchen garden in Shropshire. The not-quite smile, the thing before the smile, which he had concluded years ago was more interesting than any smile had ever managed to be. "I know," she said. Under the table, Eleanor emerged with a wooden block she had apparently left there days ago and required urgently now. She held it up as evidence of her own correctness. "Found it," she announced. "Well done," said Jane, and returned to her page. Frances had eaten most of the toast. Sebastian took what remained and finished it. Outside, the December light was doing something quiet and particular with the oak tree's bare branches. He looked at his wife. She was reading again, fully absorbed, thumb pressed to forefinger against the edge of the page where she'd paused. That small, private rhythm that she still did not, after 4 years of his telling her about it, quite believe she did. He watched her do it, the way he had watched her do it the first time on the first evening, in a drawing room in Shropshire, when she had been the wrong Miss Pemberton, and he had not yet known what that meant. He had asked Fitch who she was. Then, halfway up the stairs, he had turned back and asked again. He poured his coffee. Outside, the oak tree held its winter shape against the sky. He had no complaints.